Welcome to the FarmHopLife podcast. My guest today is Ariel McGlothlin from a tiny house called Nyth and Ariel Celeste Photography. Ariel, how are you doing today?
Good. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here. So I reached out to a group on MeWe, the survival podcast group, and asked if anybody wanted to come on and talk about farming, homesteading, anything like that. And you were pretty quick to respond. And I appreciate that. So that's what we're talking about today.
Your invitation just happened to show. I don't see by any means everything posted on there, but your invitation happened to show up in the feed right when I was scrolling through, so it worked out.
Perfect. Yes. So I haven't. I'm a new fan of yours. I hadn't heard of
Oh.
you before. So when you messaged me, I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I watched your little trailer on YouTube. I'm like, whoa, seriously? This is what she does? This is great. This is amazing. And so you got like 600 plus videos on your YouTube channel. And I mean, you're just, well, as of late, you had been pumping them out, but obviously with the new YouTube issue being locked out and whatnot, getting that channel back has been a struggle. But
Yeah, fingers crossed on that. I have a subscriber who has a relative who is head of
oh,
security in Google who thinks they're able to resolve it. I'm not able to post videos yet, but I think shortly I may be able to, which is super encouraging. But in
good.
the meantime, all my videos are also on Odysee if anyone wants to see the most recent stuff that's not on YouTube in the last month while Google's had me locked out.
Fingers crossed. Well, that gets figured out. So, what was your life like growing up before Nyth? Where did you grow up? Were you born in a tiny house? I mean,
No. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. I live in Wyoming now. I'm sitting in my tiny house here in Wyoming speaking to you. I grew up in Pennsylvania in kind of Amish farm country. My family was not actually Amish. They were Brethren, which isn't Amish and isn't Mennonite, but is another plain group. And so my
okay,
family was fairly conservative. I was really fortunate to learn a lot of useful skills from my parents because growing up, we always had a big garden, always had some amount of livestock, prepared a lot of our own food from scratch, did a lot of canning, learned to sew my own clothes, which I actually hate sewing, but I'm glad it's something I could do if I had to. Just learned a lot of useful skills. And I was homeschooled the whole way through school. My parents homeschooled all of us. I have 6 younger siblings as well. And so I got lots of practice doing all the housework stuff. And I heard you just mentioning your wife wasn't feeling well. My mother got very, very ill with morning sickness 24 hours a day for pretty much all 9 months of every pregnancy. And so I, being the oldest, got to pick up a lot of the slack there when she wasn't feeling good. So that wasn't always
sure.
appreciated at the time, but it did result in me learning a lot of very practical and useful skills for which I'm really thankful. So that's where I grew up. I'd done, this could get to be a long story, but I'd done a short road, well, it was most of a month, road trip around the mountain, well, the whole West with a friend when we were in our late teens. Neither of us had ever been anywhere west. We grew up on neighboring, she grew up on a big farm. My parents just had a little farmette. But anyway, I kind of fell in love with the West. I think I'd probably already done so before I even came out here. And a year or so later, I moved here. And so I've lived my whole adult life in a little bit in Idaho, but mostly in the state of Wyoming.
Very cool.
And that is how I got out here.
That's awesome. So you said you lived in an Amish community, but you were more Mennonite. Is that what you said? Did I catch that correctly?
My family was actually Brethren, so it's another very conservative group. And if you don't grow up in one of them, they all look the same. But
Okay.
my family did have vehicles; they weren't horse and buggy like a lot of Amish are.
Right.
But otherwise, we grew up, very conservative. And I don't know if you want to share some photos. I do have some photos of my childhood, but
Oh yeah, sure. I caught your video, well, two. One when you had some when you had your family, like your brothers. come out.
Yeah,
And
so I have a lot of siblings, like I said, and most of them are now married, and I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews as well, with another one on the way. So yeah, that I've got a fairly large family. Let's see if I can make this work. I haven't done a whole lot of screen shares, so there we go. Okay, so that was my parents. That's a baby me screaming my head off. My grandparents. I have no recollection of this. Most photos are my own. Obviously, that is not one I took. I don't know who took that
right.
one. I do have a few other childhood photos. My parents did keep bees for a while, so I got to learn a little bit about that.
That's
That's
cool.
me in the suit there helping my dad in their
That's
little
you standing
portrait.
there?
That was me standing there. I'm the oldest, so I'm generally the tallest one in all these pictures. That's me and one of my sisters with our goats. We had milk goats for most of my childhood. Um, that was a TP lodge that we built. I was a big fan, and I'm feeding my stick horse there. I was a big fan of horses and always wanted to be an Indian. My hair was just very stubbornly blonde to feel like a real Indian. Um, that was some of the turkeys we raised and a few more of my younger siblings. Some more goats and bottle feeding a couple steers the one year. It's me and some brother and a cousin weeding in the garden. Um, one year, this was really cool. If you have children of an age that can enjoy this, we grew these sunflower houses and planted the sunflowers in like a circle or a square and grew pole beans up them. And so they made kind of
Oh,
this wall. And that was just what we did with an empty extra corner of the garden one year. I thought it was super cool when I was a child.
that
Um,
is cool.
so that's some of my childhood pictures. I don't know if that fully answered your question about how I grew up or not, but
Yeah, because so I watched you, like I saw, like I was saying, your, couple of your brothers came out to visit. I watched that video, and then I saw it was like related, like my parents' garden and like their greenhouse, and so I watched that when I was like, whoa, this is interesting, like your background, and then I was reading comments, your people are like, no wonder you're so good at explaining things. Your dad's very thorough and
he
precise, and
is.
there's a reason for everything that, um, you know, yeah, there's just a reason for everything. You got to do it like this, not this, because this way, this will fail you, or, I had a problem here, so I had to add this. And, you know, it was cool to see. And so like, it makes a lot of sense, how you grew up and like where you are now. So that was it was a cool back. It's cool to see those pictures. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's something probably not even most of my longtime subscribers have ever seen as many pictures of when I was a little kid.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be a good treat for them. How often do you get back home to visit your parents? Do they come visit you?
Um, they have been to Wyoming once in the 15 years I've lived here now. Like I said, I'm the oldest, so my baby brother is still at home. They were, you know, I'm the one that left. They were still actively doing things there, and now there's quite a few
Gotcha.
nieces and nephews, like I said. So, um, I don't expect that visiting me is a real high priority when they've got lots of grandbabies to hang out with instead. But most of my siblings have gotten out here every year, every two. They like to, especially as some of those nieces and nephews get older, bring them to visit Wyoming. Some of my siblings now live actually in Seattle, so they went even further away, but the majority
Oh,
of my family is still in Pennsylvania. And I used to seem to get back there about every other year, usually kind of scheduled around somebody was getting married or something like that. Now it's been about 4 years since I've been there. Since we now have a homestead that has livestock here, it is a little bit harder to leave. And the East
definitely.
Coast has gotten a lot crazier, and I just can't say I really want to go there that much. So we do a lot of phone calls and stay in touch and email pictures back and forth and don't see each other that often in person.
That part's kind of a bummer that it's kind of like tapered off, but life gets in the way of things sometimes, like and other commitments. So I'm totally with you. I find it hard to get back. I'm from Minnesota and I live in
Okay.
Montana, so I have a lot shorter drive than you do, if I choose to drive. That is, but
Yeah, and
anyways,
it really works out. I mean, my siblings and I do like to stay in touch, and actually, in some ways, I probably have a better relationship with my parents from 2,000 miles away than we had when we were all in the same house together. And so I'm thankful for that, and I appreciate being able to maintain that. So I'm fine with not living next door.
I've kind of found something similar. Yeah, you're little because you gotta keep the routine of talking to your parents, like, hey, what's been going on? Instead of just like just come over for dinner and just same old, same old. It's something's different because you're in a different spot. So, um, what do your parents and your family think about like your lifestyle, the tiny home thing, composting toilets, and like as a content creator?
I think that for the most part, they think most of the stuff about, my general lifestyle as far as that is kind of neat. Um, we just grew up doing what a lot of people would have probably considered like prepping, but it wasn't really because of that. It was just because, if you raise your own food, if you whatever grow corn and freeze it, you have to freeze a year's worth because you're not going to have any more till it grows the next season. So
Yeah,
we always had a large, stockpile of things, and we're just well prepared for things generally to go wrong. So I think they think most of, the stuff I'm doing is cool. My parents would disapprove of some of my other lifestyle choices like clothing and having, my hair cut and down and not covered. Obviously, I'm not as conservative dressing as they are. So there's definitely some things they would disapprove of with that. But I don't think any of it has to do with pooping in a bucket or living in a tiny house or living in the mountains.
have you convinced them that pooping in a bucket is the better way to go?
I don't know. I haven't asked them if they would consider that. They live in a, more normal house that has flush toilets. So I don't know.
You have to ask them and then record the phone call or video chat, and it'd be good content.
They're fairly practical people, so I wouldn't hesitate to say that, yeah, if something, froze up or backed up, or, well, my baby brother's now owns a septic company, so they probably wouldn't be stuck for very long. But like I said, they're
Sure.
pretty practical. So if there wasn't other options, I'm sure they would do that just fine.
Um, I noticed that you don't do any ads in videos. Do you any of your videos directly or indirectly provide you income?
Somewhat, yeah. Google has done, or through YouTube has done advertising on some of them, and they pay me a commission percentage of that. That is not something I control, and what ads they put on a video entirely depends on what
Okay.
it's not based on what they think about me. It's whatever Google knows about you, the viewer, and what you may be interested in and what might be worthwhile advertising to you. So that's not something I really have any control over, but they do put ads on there. I've never decided to work with anybody like a specific sponsorship or affiliate or thing. Well, I guess I am an Amazon affiliate because mostly just because it saved me time, because so many people would ask me repeatedly the same questions. Where do you get that?
Right.
Where is that thing you're using? And so being able to just set up and organize, here's all those things, you can find them easily instead of having to re-find the link every time somebody asked me, was handy. So Amazon pays me a little commission, if somebody buys something through that. So that's nice. But yeah,
That
I've
makes sense.
never worked to set up anything that's, it's probably a good way to go to, contact companies and say, hey, I like your product. I would like to recommend your product to, I mean, I still recommend products to people if they're ones I like. I've just never bothered setting up a relationship with their manufacturers that pays me to
Sure.
do so.
When did off-grid living become something that you were interested in?
Um, there's probably two answers for that. I ended up off grid in this tiny house because when I moved in here, I had the opportunity to park in a pretty spectacular location that was a little clearing tucked in the trees where I lived for the first 7.5 years that I lived in this house. I've since gotten married and moved, and we're on our own property, and we're in a different place tucked into the mountains. But that spectacular parking spot, because if somebody's not familiar, I do live in a tiny house that's on wheels. You can hitch it up to any big 1-ton pickup and tow it down the road. So this house is movable, which is, I guess, not a normal way people talk about their dwellings. Yeah, I lived here and then I just moved my house. But it was a really cool spot, and there just being on grid, there was no option at all. The closest grid power and stuff was a half-mile away. It would have been a multi-million-dollar power run, to get anything there. So I went off grid specifically because of that situation. As far as being attracted to it, I've probably always liked being more independent and self-sufficient. And so all of those things have probably been somewhat attractive to me for most of my life. But before I moved into the tiny house, I was living in a very normal, to most people, townhouse that a roommate and I shared, and we had, grid power and city water and sewer and all of that stuff.
So what I'm gathering is that you weren't necessarily seeking out the off-grid living. It just kind of like, oh, I have an opportunity to move, like, 1, live in a tiny house, 2, move it over here where there is no power, so I have to make this work if this is what I want. Is that right?
Yeah, but I also do value the independence and freedom. And there's, it's nice when it's like, oh, there's a storm and everyone else has power out. It's like, well,
right.
I have the same limited power at my house that I always have from my little tiny solar setup. And so that's kind of nice. And I do really value that independence. The new property my husband and I bought together actually had power run, just to a pole right inside the lane. So we may in the future end up with power. The house on wheels here is still, only using the same little solar setup and generator that it's been using for my whole life in here currently. But what I do know for sure is I don't ever want to be in a position where I can't do the things important to life if the grid goes down. I guess I've lived this way too long. I'm probably never going to be okay again with knowing that I couldn't heat my house or cook my food or take care of basic sanitation or water or things like that without power. So we might eventually have some more, which is handy when you have it. But for sure, all those, essential to life things, we're always going to have 1 or 2 or 4 options of how to do them without as well.
Definitely. It almost seems to me like, so normal people, it's okay that you're not normal. Normal people are normal people are too comfortable being reliant on the grid, where it almost seems to me like you're uncomfortable being reliant on the grid. Is that like, so you find comfort in being self-sufficient?
For luxury and extra comforts. But when they go away, I still want to be warm. I mean, you live in a cold, snowy place too, but I mean, it's been snowing all day. It's normally winter here for like 8 months a year. I don't want to ever be in a position where I could freeze to death because the power's out. My only source of heat is electric, or where I can't make hot food because my only way to cook is electric, or where I can't get drinking water because the only way to get it to me involves something electrical, and so on.
I'm kind of stuck where I'm at because electricity here is so stinking cheap that it's like everything in my house is electric. Yeah, I live in a basic house. I'm not cool like you, but
no, and electricity is actually really cheap here too. And people are like, oh, your off-grid setup, well, that's, makes financial sense. It's like, no, financially, for what I spent on having a little solar setup, I could have bought power for the next 50 years here in Wyoming and still not broke even. And all of those computers will be gone, worn out long before then. But it does give you a certain amount of independence and location choices that are not otherwise options. And so that does have some value.
I was watching your video on like was $90,000 too much for a tiny house video, like the finances broken down and everything. And you mentioned that the area that you lived near, like houses were just going for like, or millions or something like that. Can I ask where abouts you were that at the time? Because this is 7.5, 8 years ago now that you had moved from there. Where was that?
I was very close to, at that time, Jackson, Wyoming, which people may know of
Oh,
Jackson
that makes
Hole.
a lot of
It's a
sense
massive
now.
ski resort. There's 2 giant national parks. And as long as I lived there, I may not have said that publicly because my living situation would have probably fallen into a gray area as far as the legalities in that location were concerned. I never had an
Okay.
issue all the years I lived there, but that's where it's not a joke that people laugh that the billionaires are squeezing out the millionaires. There was
I
no
have
way
heard
with
that, yeah.
anything I ever want to do in my life that I was ever going to buy a place there.
Does I know we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit here, but like, does Jackson have like kind of like a homeless problem now, doesn't it? Because it's gotten so expensive, or have they pretty
Yeah,
much
I
just
mean,
like
there's
kicked
plenty of
everyone out?
well, a lot of people commute from, close to 100 miles away if they're actually working people there.
Whoa.
Um, and that can be sketchy because like today, due to the weather, every single road in and out is currently closed unless they got some reopened because avalanches block them and so on.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and
scary.
then, yeah, I mean, I know people who are, if you think of your, I don't know, stereotypical like dirtbag who's a homeless person who doesn't want to work or is just a lazy bum who lives in a van down by the river, where we have a lot of people, or I should say there was a lot of people in that area who held down 3 full-time jobs, were maybe a professional chef in a 5-star restaurant, and were living in their van down by the river because there was
Yeah,
nothing they could afford to live in, which is how I ended up in a tiny house in the first place, because there was nothing I could afford to live in.
that makes a lot of sense now. So what was the biggest challenge to make tiny house off-grid living possible?
Um, the tiny house part was not hard for me personally. I lived in a lot of small spaces. I've lived out of my car. I like to backpack when I live out of a little, couple square meter tent for weeks that, you can't even stand up in. So I know some people, if you watch these tiny house shows now, they have this big deal about how do I get rid of all these things and what do I keep? I don't really have any help for people who are in that position. I didn't have that many things I wanted to keep, and I kept all of them. So that for me, just with my interests and stuff, wasn't a big deal. And I also do like being very active and outside. So a lot of my activities involve gardening or going hiking or wildlife photography. None of those things happen inside the building that I live in anyhow. So that partially is what helps it work out well for me, just with my particular set of interests. The off-grid stuff, some of that was a little bit challenging. I moved into the tiny house right at the beginning of winter, at the end of November, which if you're going to go off-grid in a cold mountain snowy place, I would recommend not doing it right at the start of winter, just so you have a little bit of a buffer space there before things all become emergencies to kind of just figure out your systems. But even then, none of it was anything real big. It was more just getting down my system. Okay, how do I do this? When do I need to do that next? Until it just became a routine that wasn't like, oh, this is an emergency, and oh no, this is empty, and oh no, I have to do that, when it was
Right.
all, kind of new.
You just wanted to do tiny house living on hard mode. It's not a big deal. It's just
I guess that's how it ended up anyway.
so it sounds like you never really felt cramped, and like an extra 30 square feet wouldn't make a big difference to you because you just didn't have the need for the space.
That would mostly have made a difference like when I have friends or family visiting. I don't have a whole lot of space. Somebody can sleep on the couch. It does turn into a bed, and right up these stairs behind me is the loft where my bed is. So the furthest apart you can get when the whole house is only 24 feet long is, you're not going to have a whole lot of space and distance. But other than that, as long as I was single for just me, this space worked really well for me. Now it's a little snugger with 2 people. My husband doesn't have a ton of stuff in the house either because he's a builder and more of his stuff
Sure.
goes in a shop rather than a house. And he is still actually temporarily has a cabin that's provided as part of his job. So he's here part of the time and he's there part of the time. So for now, that's worked out well. We haven't had to put all of his stuff and my stuff in here together because he
Yeah.
still keeps a lot of stuff there. But yeah, it's a little more snug with 2 people. I have friends who, are not only married, but have 2 or 3 children and live in the same size of house. And I have to say, if I was in that position, I would want a little more space. But
Right.
definitely for just me and the things I do, like I said, it's been really great, for a lot of years. This is the 8th year now I've lived in here, for, my lifestyle.
Do you ever give Fine Nyth, like, celebrate her? Is it a her? Is it a he? Is it
Yeah, I
a
call her
they? Do you ever celebrate her birthday? It's
her.
like 8
I mean, I
years,
certainly don't bake the house a cake or anything, but I have
8 great years.
most years done just kind of an anniversary retrospective, video or a blog post, just kind of looking back at, what I think about this whole setup now that it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years,
Yeah.
etc. So that's probably, I don't know if you call that a celebration, but that's a tradition I started a few years in, and I've kind of done it every anniversary of moving in ever since.
I mean, that kind of makes sense because you've been in one spot longer than most people have been in, like, a house. It
Yeah,
seems like
who aren't
people
on
like,
mute.
right. I mean, so any do you have any idea what building your tiny home would cost today?
I
Double? Triple?
I would guess, I don't know how much labor has gone up, and I didn't build it myself. Builders, I hired builders to build it for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much that's gone up. I do know for sure, because we're building some things right now ourselves, that materials have gone up 2, 3, 400% of what they were.
Yeah.
So I don't know for sure, but it would certainly cost more than what I paid 8 years ago. And this is, if anyone's wondering, this is built like a custom stick built home. This is not, because people are like, well, why don't you just buy an RV? I am opening and closing the window because the wood stove's on this side and it gets really warm in here. An RV is nice. If you're going to move every day, you probably don't want something as heavy as this tiny house, even though you could do that. That doesn't necessarily work out to be real practical if you're moving all the time. But if you're going to move occasionally, and I didn't know how often I was going to move. Now it's only moved twice in 8 years. But, especially in a cold climate like this, having an actual, stick built house, it's insulated with spray foam, it's super warm. That's why I have to open windows. I mean, it's below freezing and snowing outside. It's January. And I'm in short sleeves and I'm too hot indoors. So the building itself, obviously over time, tires would deteriorate, and if you want to move again, you may have to get new tires. But the structure itself should be just fine in another 100 years. I mean, it's
Right.
better construction than most custom homes being built today.
Yeah, I'm in the trades, and I've seen some new housing. Like, I don't see this lasting more than 45 years, but whatever. What Changing gears here a little bit, what motivates you to grow your own food? We kind of touched on it a little bit already, but if you want to go into a little bit more detail.
Well, probably the, self-sufficiency, independence aspect, that's part of it. I'd say for me, the bigger motivation is to have control and knowledge over what actually goes in my body. I've had some health issues from childhood on that were probably caused by the Western medical system. And so at a very young age, I got to learn about that there can be issues with just trusting supposed experts to tell you what to do. And so that has probably made me, even more than some people, want to know and understand. And I like gardening and I like plants, even if all I ever grew was pretty flowers. That's part of it as well. But I also do like knowing what's gone into my food, how it was grown, are there actually any nutrients in that lettuce leaf, or even with animals, how were they handled, how were they treated, how did they die, all of that.
Yeah.
And butchering is far from my favorite thing to do, but that is something we do here. And my husband also hunts, and we butcher elk together and things like that are somewhat large butchering projects. But yeah, I think
that's a lot of work.
It is. Produces a lot of meat too. But yeah, that's probably the biggest single thing for me, is wanting to know what is in my food. Is it actually nourishing my body when I eat it? And being able to trust what actually went on, because I'm the one that did it and saw it, and so on. I don't have to just believe what someone else tells me.
Right. There's That's great to know for sure. And you just feel more like empowered. Like, I made this thing. So what if it's just a dumb tomato? Like, I made this thing.
Well, if
And
I
then
made a tomato grow here in Wyoming, I would be very happy with myself if it was outdoors.
we'll just have your husband build a little like attached greenhouse onto your tiny home. It'll be
Well,
the
an attached
house.
greenhouse onto the little house we're planning to build is definitely part of the plans.
I'm gonna get there.
Sure.
We're working down the line. We're gonna get there. What are some foods that you can every year?
Well, since we were just speaking of tomatoes, for sure I can tomatoes every year, and no, they're not ones I grow here because this climate does not permit growing tomatoes outdoors without a heated greenhouse. But there are some local people who drive to Utah and bring up produce from, semi-local farms, and I do can a lot of tomato products every year that we use through the whole a year. I always call it spaghetti sauce, but we use it as spaghetti sauce and tomato soup and pizza sauce and anything else you want a tomato based sauce for. I like to forage and walk around the woods, so if I can get enough wild berries, I'll either juice them and can that, or make different jam or something out of them.
Any specific kind of berry? Do you have huckleberries down there?
We do. We never get enough of those that I want to can them. We eat them all. They take a lot of pickle. We do pick huckleberries. There's also, let's see, main ones are choke cherries and service berries. Those are both a little less tasty than huckleberries fresh. But when juiced, they make a really excellent juice. So that's probably the ones I can the most. I usually do pickles every year. We both like pickles, and then other pickled things. It's not really canning, but I do make sauerkraut every year. Cabbage grows really well here, and I like that. And then my husband's family history is actually Danish, and there's a kind of a sweet and sour pickled cabbage, usually done with purple cabbage, called Danish Christmas cabbage. And I usually can a bunch of that every year because we both like it, and we don't just eat it at Christmas. So
that sounds pretty good.
Other than that, I'll make applesauce, or, again, if I get them from someone else in a slightly warmer area, sometimes I'll can my own peaches. I'm trying to think what else I've canned a lot of. That's probably the main things, because some of the other veggies I prefer, either dehydrated or frozen a little more than canned.
Right. Are you in zone 3 or zone 4?
You look at a map and it says 4, but things grow like a 3. And one of the things I find that people in warmer-ish areas often don't think about with growing zones is that says, this is the coldest temperature you're going to go down to. It's not going to get colder on the coldest day than minus 30 or whatever. But I'll have people comment on things I share, and they'll be like, but I live in a zone 3 and I grow tomatoes just fine. It's like, so zone is only part of it. That's saying what the coldest day is. That doesn't tell you if your area spent one day at minus 30 or 4 months at minus 30, and so combined with the coldest temperatures, I also have a very long winter, a very short growing season. And the other thing a growing zone doesn't tell you at all is how warm is your summer. I get frosts and freezes all through the summer here. So I have an entire frost cover set up where I can roll frost cloth on and off of every single garden bed. It still takes a little time, but I've got it set up where it's fairly efficient, because if I could not cover even what I grow in the summer here is what most people would consider a winter garden in most climates. Even the cold hardy stuff that can take freezes is not going to make it to being very productive if I cannot cover it on the coldest summer nights. So that's a lengthy answer to what growing zone am I in. A really cold one.
That's good. That's good to know. It's really not that simple. It's just like, oh yeah, like what you were saying. I'm in zone 3 and I can whatever. I do backflips over my peaches or whatever they grow. And
but you may have more useful for me actually is the first and last frost dates, the growing days you have in between there. Like where my parents live in kind of south central Pennsylvania, I think they have like 160 something days on an average year between the first and last frost.
Oh, wow.
When you enter my location into a calculator, it says you don't have first and last frost dates. You don't have growing days, which is pretty much true.
That's funny. I guess I didn't think about, like, I mean, it can get dang hot down in Wyoming, especially like, Tetonish area. That's really more where I spent my time, but I didn't think that you have the risk of frost throughout the summer. Like I just haven't spent extended time
It's
there.
more
So
rare, but there was one year where a foot of snow canceled the 4th of July fireworks. I mean, we can get winter weather at any time of the year. So there's no like, oh, now the frost risk is all past, and so I can count on this thing growing for however many weeks or months without freezing.
that's crazy. So with your climate, that
Mm-hmm.
is kind of maybe a zone 3. Uh, how did you pick your chicken and duck breeds?
So I went looking for obviously breeds that are known to be somewhat cold hardy and somewhat independent. And I just start out with just searching for cold hardiest chicken breed and stuff, and reading different people's lists of these are the 5 top cold hardy ones, or this is the one we have and why we like them. What I ended up settling on was our chickens are all Icelandic chickens. Iceland, as you can probably guess from the name alone, is a pretty cold place, and apparently their history is they were brought there by Vikings like 1,000 years ago, and they are more of a land race breed. Nobody was trying to breed an Icelandic chicken. They just had no genetic influence with any other chickens anywhere else on the planet for about 1,000 years. And now they've started to die out as some of the more modern breeds have become popular. So they're, I always forget what the word is, threatened or something. They're not called endangered species when they're domestic breeds,
Right.
but that equivalent of domestic livestock. There's not a lot of them left in the world. There are some in Iceland, like a few thousand, and a few thousand in the States, mostly with people who are actively working to preserve the breed, which is another aspect about them that I think is neat. I like heritage breeds and keeping them alive in modern times. But the main reason that I chose them is they are very cold hardy. They tend to lay very well through cold, dark winters. That's what I had read, and that has so far been our experience. Our hens have all been laying pretty well, and obviously we just went through the shortest period of the year. And they don't have any artificial light. I was pretty sure nobody in Iceland was turning on LED, lamps in their chicken coops for the last 1,000 years. So I figured that is not any, at this point, what they're used to. They're excellent foragers. They're a little smaller chicken than a lot of, more popular egg or meat breeds, but they, in the summer, even though I offered them, supplemental feed, they really didn't eat it. They just ate bugs and everything else they could find. And even in the winter, they don't eat that much. And we did butcher some extra roosters. They make a small carcass, like a 3-pound carcass. They're not going to be like if you raise Cornish crosses or something, but they're tasty little birds. And so I've been so far happy with that choice. But that's basically I was looking for something cold hardy. I like the idea of helping preserve endangered heritage breeds, and I like critters that are mostly self-sufficient, and and that still have the more natural traits of wanting to find their own food, wanting to mother their own chicks, and some of those things that have been kind of lost with some of the strains that have been selected for heavy meat production or heavy egg production without paying any attention to any of those other like normal chicken life things.
Right.
And then ducks, we've got blue Swedish ducks. Obviously, Sweden is also a cold place in the world, and they're also somewhat, threatened breed, and there's not tons of them around. They were also known to be very cold hardy, very tough, very independent, and they look pretty. And so that's the ducks we've got.
Nice. It probably makes a big difference, especially where you are. I mean, I'm in like zone 5 here, and
Oh, that's like the tropics.
I wish last weekend we had been in about the 20s or so, and then we had a couple overnight temps of like -9. I mean, just dropped. And I'm out in the chicken coop with my son, and I'm like, man, why did the chicken's feet look weird? Like, I've never seen them look like that. I had to look it up. They got mild frostbite because it just dropped. I don't know if it probably is the breed, but also the temperature, just there was no gradual drop. It's just straight up dropped to -9. And so I was like, hope they make it. And then in like these same articles or whatever, they're like, oh, to treat frostbite on a chicken, bring it in, rub its feet, put Epsom salt on it. Like if you need, and I was like, no. if they start getting frostbite, they're gonna go.
Yes, ours have not seemed yet to have frostbite. The one rooster might have frostbite a little bit at the tip of his comb. Icelandics have a huge variety of colors and shapes and comb styles and such. Over time, if ours successfully, don't count your chickens before they're hatched, but if ours successfully reproduce, the ones they will choose to keep will for sure be the ones that have like the smaller rose combs that don't have the big, tall, fleshy part that sticks up that's easier to frostbite. Just because of where we live. But they have a nice little barn they can go into. It's not heated or anything, but it is very much dry. They can be dry and out of the wind. And so far they've seemed to be fine with that.
Yeah, I saw that. It looks really nice.
Yeah, Clay did an awesome job of building it. It's more like a chicken palace. It's not really a chicken coop.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. It must be nice to have a builder that you're married to. Like, honey, can you build this? Yeah.
It is. And even when I think, oh, well, this will be fine, he's like, no, I can make it way nicer than that. I'm like, okay.
I was going to settle, but you bought yourself more work. That's fine. Do you have any plans for other livestock?
We probably don't. I mean, we may at some point decide to play around with something like turkeys, just because we both enjoy eating turkey. But as far as bigger livestock, we only have 3 acres here, and that goes into another thing that I see. Depending on where you live, 3 acres could support a whole lot of things. With the semi-arid desert, high mountain, cold climate here, if we got any bigger herbivore, from a goat to a sheep to a cow to anything like that, we would have to buy hay for it for most of the year, because there's simply not enough forage on this property. And I'm not real interested at this point into getting into anything that we have to pretty much most of the year supply food for it from somewhere else. That I'd rather just buy half a cow from a neighbor, if we're going to do that, from somebody who has place to pasture them, than trying to crowd them in here. So we might always change our minds about something, but at the moment we're probably going to stick with the little things that work well on the space we've got.
I thought that might be the case, seeing cows 25 yards behind you in some of your
videos. We are surrounded by cattle pastures, so there are lots of beef cows here, but they're not ours.
Yeah, I'm only on like 2 acres, so I know what you mean. Like, and I'm overlooking a generational, grass pastured, like nice. Black Angus ranch or whatever. So, yeah. I can literally see what I'm gonna eat, next year, grow up. I'm like, you look good.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I assume that you're in the same boat, whether it be cattle or goats or sheep or whatever it is that tickles your fancy, I guess. Whatever's on the menu for next year, right?
For now, it's mostly been elk, and they take care of themselves out in the mountains all year, and so that's worked out.
Just got to go get them.
Which can be a lot of work too.
Definitely. So you talked about the shop a little bit earlier. Is the shop just for Clay, or are you going to multi-purpose it? Like maybe do some seed starting in there or anything?
Probably not seed starting. It was not constructed with a lot of windows. It is primarily for him and all of his tools and such for his business and so on. Now, if he was sitting beside me, he'd say, you have a lot of stuff in there too. That's true. It's currently also doubling as our extra pantry storage, nice. and some of that stuff. But as I mentioned, we hope to eventually at some point build a small house attached to the ground. We're thinking of going really huge. Like this place is about 160 square feet, like a 500 or 600 square foot house. And hopefully with that will come a attached greenhouse. That would be where I'd hope to grow some fresh greens through the winter and do seed starting for the outdoor garden in the summer. That's and cool. Hopefully a root cellar to make it a little easier to store some of those root crops a little longer before they start going bad and such. But right now, some of that stuff is just stacked in the corner of the shop. But the primary intention of the shop is to, keep some tools, and I keep gardening tools and stuff in there as well. But, keep tools and mostly to have a workspace for him.
So I did hear correctly that you might actually build a house that's not on wheels.
That's the idea. If somebody comes back next week and asks why didn't it happen yet, I'm not sure when this is going to start. He's still working on finishing out kind of the inside of the shop to have workbenches and all the stuff to make that easy to work from. The general thought is that maybe that will be all done by spring, and that maybe when the ground thaws again, we could start on a little house foundation.
Wow.
That's going to be dependent on work schedules and budgets and materials price increases and all of that. But the hope would be that at some point with two of us, it would be nice to have a little more space than this place. And so to build a small house here on our property.
So then what's going to happen to find Nyth?
She's probably going to stay right here, and she's either going to turn into the guest house so that I can actually have a, guest spot for friends and family when they come over. Or we've also talked about, down the road, maybe even doing a little Airbnb for some extra income. But
that was my first thought.
That's all somewhere in the future theoretical plans for right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be cool. So we talked a little bit about your YouTube situation. What's with the flip phone?
Yeah, I have somewhere. It's funny. I've had this now long enough that like my nieces and nephews come over and they think my phone is the coolest thing because they've never seen one in their life, which is funny to me. I use a phone for talking. Before smartphones were invented, I already had dedicated big cameras because photography is something I've been interested in for a long time. So I have several big, DSLRs, and I already had a laptop. And with most of the photo and video editing stuff, doing it through a phone size screen and power just never made sense. So since I already had all those things before smartphones became a thing, and I'm not a big fan of carrying around tracking spy devices with me all the time, I use my phone for talking. And so a flip phone does that very inexpensively and works out good for me, because I use a computer, laptop when I want to do other things that I realize a lot of people do from smartphones. And, that can certainly be practical if you don't already have that. I just already had so much other big dedicated equipment to other things that trying to run it through a phone just didn't really make sense to me.
That's a good answer. Believe me, I'm definitely conflicted having a smartphone. Like, it's so convenient, but I hate the privacy issues.
It's funny, over the years, like when they first became a thing, people would be like, why do you still have a dumb old phone? And now when people see it, I get more of that, oh, well, I don't think I could do it, but that would be so cool if I could go back to a flip phone. So it's just been amusing to me to watch that change through time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm even looking at having like a custom Android ROM, so I don't have I'm trying to de-Google my phone. I'm still on the fence, the convenience over privacy debate in my head, and I don't know what's going to win yet.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, but for me, that's how it ended up this way. I already had, bigger, better equipment that did a lot of the things that people now use smartphones for. So all I really want my phone to do is let me talk to people, and it does that.
Very nice. So what is the long-term goal for your new property?
The long-term goal is for us to live here happily ever after and produce not all, because as long as we have access to buying things from other places, I'm going to want chocolate and Clay's going to want coffee, but produce the majority of our sustenance here. We did plant a small orchard last fall and this spring. It's small and it'll be a while before we are eating any fruit off of that. Planted a bunch of berry bushes, but are wanting to work toward having, kind of fruit that reproduces itself, plants that reproduce themselves, chickens and ducks that reproduce themselves, which is another reason I want some of the more old-fashioned breeds that are still known to generally go broody and actually raise their own babies.
Sure, yeah.
And so, you know, that's a long-term goal. You know, I already grow a lot of veggies and stuff in the summer, and we eat a lot of it fresh and preserve some of it. But I want to just kind of keep building on that to get to the point where, other than a few luxury things that, you know, just are never going to be produced in this part of the world, that we can eventually hopefully be mostly self-sufficient as far as the the foods we consume here on our property.
That'd be great to be able to do all that. I mean, that's a lot of work
Yeah,
to
we're not going to be there next year. I mean, like I said, there's
maintain and
fruit trees. It's going to be years before they produce. It's going to be years before some of those berry bushes are big. Things grow slowly here, you know, with the weather and all that. But, you know, the garden's already productive. We're getting tons of chicken eggs right now. We have a freezer full of chicken that, you know, grow up here and run around the yard. So, you know, we're working toward that. Hopefully every year it'll be a little more. I wanted to get bees. That was on the to-do list for this year, but with moving and everything else, somehow I ran out of summer and hours in a day. So that didn't happen yet, but, you know, our own honey production is also on the eventual to-do list, and just all that kind of stuff.
that'd be really cool.
So I guess maybe that would be a livestock thing we're considering. They're smaller than chickens, not a
That's
bigger
true.
thing.
That's true. That's kind of like a cheap, like an easy thing to. Well, they're not easy to keep or whatever, but that does relate to the livestock question, I suppose.
Yeah.
But hey, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or wrap up on, or?
I don't know. I just encourage anybody watching this, if you have similar interests, not that anybody else is going to like all exactly the things I like doing in life, but over the years of sharing my ups and downs and experiences and stuff with people, I have got a lot of people that make me a little bit sad, because they'll eventually comment something like, you know, I'm 80 now and I wish I had done what you're doing. And I didn't know it was an option, or I didn't know I could, or I just, you know, I did all the things I was supposed to do, and now I'm old and I can't do the things I want to do. And so what I would encourage people to do is, whatever the things are, if you picture yourself on your deathbed, what are you going to wish you had done in your life? And then figure out what it's going to take to get that. You're not necessarily going to be there tomorrow. I mean, I could go through a whole lot of history here. I worked a lot of jobs I didn't like for a while to pay for this house, and so on. But figure out what your goal is, because if you don't know what you want to do in life and aren't taking steps to work toward whatever that is, which very well may not be a tiny house, and you may hate chickens, and maybe you never want to walk around on a mountainside backpacking or anything like that, but figure out what those things are for you and what you want to do, and then figure out what steps you're going to have to take, you know, to make that happen. Because it's sad to me when people get toward the end of their life and then say, I wish I had spent my time differently. And, you know, time is all something that we never get back, and we never know how much we're going to have. But that's something I wish for people to be able to work toward, spending more of their time doing more of what they want, which sometimes requires intentionally thinking about, what do you want and how are you going to make that happen?
That was really well said. That brings up a really, like, I'm kind of watching your videos like out of order. So what is it that you do for work these days?
A variety of things. I clean houses for a couple people. That's kind of the most consistent year-round thing.
Does that pay pretty well?
What's that?
Does that pay pretty well?
It can, actually. I happen to clean for some fairly wealthy people who are willing to pay pretty well to have the same person always in their house.
Sure.
They're, you know, the kind of families that don't necessarily want a cleaning service who's going to send a stranger, you know, that they don't know. They do place a value on their privacy and such. So I have a better paid cleaning job than some, for sure, which has been
good for you. That's awesome.
And then odds and ends of stuff. I mean, in the summer, sometimes I'll help somebody with their ranch work, or painting a building, or lawn maintenance, or, you know, mowing and weed whacking. In the winter, I'll end up doing a lot of snow shoveling for people. And so everything else is just kind of odds and ends and a variety of things, which I actually enjoy, because I would not be a good person to sit in an office building doing the same thing day after day. I would just get incredibly bored with that. So I like the variety. And over the years, once I had paid off my house, that kind of gave me the financial freedom to spend less time doing jobs I didn't like, because I have a lifestyle that, still requires an income, but less than some, because I choose to enjoy things that are not generally expensive. Once you have a pair of decent shoes, you can walk around the mountains for a lot of miles without it costing anything extra. Or, you buy a few seeds and you can spend a lot of hours in a garden without it costing more money, and so on. So that's worked out, okay. And it also means that bigger projects like wanting to build a house go slowly, but there's trade-offs to whatever you choose in life.
That's very true. Well, it's cool that, you can make that all work out for you. So I was going to ask a follow-up question, but I couldn't make it sound right. But so we're gonna skip that. So hey, is there anything that you wanna plug before we sign off here?
Oh, well, if anybody's interested in checking out what I'm doing, my tiny house is called Nyth. That's Welsh for my nest, FYNYTH. If you search for that, you can find me everywhere I am. I do have a blog with lots and lots of posts from the past 8 years of ups and downs and things I've learned and things that worked out well and things that I wouldn't do again, which I try to share because I hope somebody else can learn from my experiences and save themselves a little time and trouble. There's a video channel on both YouTube and Odysee where, I think there's 650 something videos with lots of ups and downs. And then some of that is also just photography. I enjoy the wildlife I'm surrounded by living here in the mountains. We have, mountain lions, bears, moose, elk, bison, wolves, all kinds of cool creatures. And so some of them are simply wildlife videos, which are not my most popular, but they're one of my favorites. But you can find me there on MeWe, Flote. I'm not really on any of the big legacy social media sites. I left, Facebook and such quite a while ago. But if you just search for Nyth, you'll find me everywhere that I am, pretty much.
Very cool. Well, this has been a great interview, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. So thank you.
Well, thanks for setting this up. And since you're, kind of a neighbor, closer than a lot of people, if you ever get to Wyoming, give me a shout and come over for a visit.
I'd love to. I'll bring the whole family. So we'll
get some work
done. Get something done there. So help you out.